commemorating freedom and democracy to George Washington, and it resides in Mount Vernon. And most of you know that the General Assembly is the oldest, I have to read this, continuous lawmaking body in the Western Hemisphere, and the first elective legislative assembly in the New World. We have a lot to be proud of, and we're challenged by the past to be the best. Since our legislators are well known to a lot of you, I'm going to just mention some highlights on why they're so valuable to us. First, both of you are real, accessible people, and that is so important. Everyone in this room, the minute you meet one of them, is going to think you know them. Yes. Second, you have seniority, which gives you, working on behalf of senior and other issues, more influence, yes, in the General Assembly. Since 2019, Delegate Willett has been reelected twice and will visit with us in the fall and tell us why he should be reelected in November. In addition to being on the Agriculture, Chesapeake Bay, and Natural Resources and Appropriations Committees, he plays a huge role on the Health and Human Services Committee and related entities, which I have to read: the Joint Commission on Healthcare, the Workforce Development Authority, and chairs a select host committee dealing with rural and small town healthcare. Senator Van Valkenburg was first elected in 2017 to the House of Delegates, where he served 3 terms, and he was elected to the Senate in 2023. He continues as a longtime history and U.S. government teacher in Henrico County. In addition to being on other numerous committees, he chairs the Education Subcommittee on Public Education. He is the only school teacher in the Senate, something of immeasurable value. In that role, he works tirelessly. We hope you work tirelessly. I'm just reading. Yeah. He works tirelessly to ensure the legislature passes sound legislation and that Virginia is a leader in public education. Today, they will speak on key events in the past General Assembly and the outlook for 2026. We will hear from both of them. I will begin the Q&A, and then I'll open it up to the floor. I think they tossed a coin or something, and I think Delegate Willett is going to speak first.
Great, thank you. Oh, I was going second. That's good. No, good afternoon. It's wonderful to be with you. I feel a bit underdressed because normally there's a rule that says if you're a legislator, you at least have to show up with a sport coat. But we also have a rule that Skylar taught me that if it's over 98% humidity and 96 degrees temperature-wise, you don't have to wear a coat. Although it's very pleasant in here. I love being inside. But it's great to be with so many friends I recognize, and what a wonderful turnout. So we'll give our introductions here, but I know you have prepared questions because you always have questions for us, very good questions. So we'll get to that in short order. But no, it is great to be with you. It's been a heck of a year in so many ways, and the year is not done as we move forward. I was going to give you some of the background of sort of what I've been doing, and even before the session started. This time, literally a year ago, we were meeting across the state looking at rural health care issues. And to back up a little bit for that, during the last session, our speaker, Don Scott, expressed great concern about rural health care issues in Virginia. And the reason for that, he had made a trip to Southwest Virginia at the invitation of Travis Hackworth, who's a Republican senator from the Tazewell area. Speaker had never been that far west in Virginia, but what he saw, besides a very beautiful part of the state, was super troubling, and that was the lack of health facilities, the number of hospitals that had closed there, not one, but several hospitals. And then he saw geography, or I guess you would say topography, that was insurmountable for some people in terms of, even for those folks who did have access to health facilities, couldn't get there because you're talking about first of all, needing transportation, but secondly, having to drive sometimes an hour and a half or longer just to get to a doctor's appointment, or maybe even a pharmacy that could be literally an hour away. So a great disparity in healthcare access. So Speaker returned to Richmond, asked me to chair something we call the Select Committee on Rural Healthcare, and bipartisan committee in the House, and we did a roadshow of sorts. We toured the state. We actually started in Southwest, went to Tazewell and other areas there, and met with the folks running health systems, folks running free clinics, folks who are trying to get health care, lots of providers, from doctors, nurses, social workers, the whole spectrum. And took public testimony, took a lot of notes, had a lot of great conversations. We then went to Southside Virginia, and I'm going to answer a question here, because a lot of people said, Rodney, you're from right here, actually, Henrico County, which is anything where we are, anything but rural. Well, I grew up in Farmville, Virginia, which is part of Southside Virginia. I actually have a couple of my Farmville compatriots here today who can speak to this, but my formative years were in Farmville, and the story I told the Speaker, and I think this is one of the reasons he asked me to chair this committee, is that when I was growing up, if we needed to go to the pediatrician, we got in the car and drove to Richmond, because my mom was from Richmond. We had doctors here. I had two brothers at that point. If we needed to go to the dentist, same story. Got in the car, drove to Richmond. When my youngest brother was about to be born, I have three younger brothers, we got in the car and we moved to Richmond for a week and lived with my grandparents. I thought it was a big party. What I never thought about as a kid was the fact that we were driving an hour plus from Farmville to Richmond to get health care. And I can tell you now that I look back on those years, a lot of my friends weren't driving to Richmond, and they weren't getting health care. They certainly weren't getting pediatrician visits, and they certainly weren't getting going to the dentist. And then there were a lot of moms, expectant mothers, who, but for the grace of God, probably wouldn't have had their kids, but they did have successful births despite all that in Farmville. But it was challenging. And so we went back to Southside. Interesting to see a hospital that doesn't look anything like it did when I was there, when my friends, the Rogers, were there. But they are still struggling to get OBGYN. So Farmville right now relies on a midwifery model to do most of the deliveries. They have OBGYNs from Richmond who rotate in and out. They still do not have permanent OBGYNs in Farmville, but they're making it work with that system. It's still a challenge. We finished up our tour going to the Eastern Shore of Virginia, absolutely beautiful part of the world, but a place where I think over half of the health care that's provided on the Eastern Shore is through a free clinic. Think about that. 50% of the health care is going through a free clinic. And it is a wonderful, it's called an FQHC, Federally Qualified Health Center. It's a series of health centers across the Eastern Shore, at least the Virginia part. They do amazing work. But think about that. You're depending on a free clinic to provide most of your health care. So to get to the story here of what we did, we came back to Richmond as a body, again, a bipartisan body, if I didn't emphasize that enough. We decided on 30 bills and budget amendments to propose, and unanimously agreed to issue that in a report to the Speaker. The session followed the session that we completed this past March. Didn't get all of those things to fruition, but a lot of them are now becoming law. A lot of things did work their way into the budget. This is everything from going back to the midwives, making it easier for midwives to do what they do, expanding telehealth access. We've got some money for what we're calling a transportation pilot to make it easier to get people who don't have any other transportation to their doctor's appointments, to those follow-up appointments. It's just a start, but I think something in the positive direction. I did carry, related to that, a budget amendment related to the GLP-1 drugs. It's kind of the wonder drug now, not for everybody, but it is helping a lot of people deal with serious obesity. I didn't realize this, but I don't know. Are you on what health plan? Are you in the state health plan? Yeah, so we're on the state health plan, which is a Blue Cross plan. So if we needed those drugs, we can get them. Most Medicaid patients in Virginia could not get them unless they were deathly obese. I mean, seriously obese. And I thought that was unfair, as did other members. So we voted to amend that requirement, lowering the threshold to qualify for that. And this gets into a bit of a rigmarole because that passed with huge bipartisan support. The governor did not take kindly to the amendment. He vetoed it. This is actually one of these things still playing out because the way he vetoed it actually was not procedurally correct, not constitutionally correct. So technically, this amendment stands, but there's a bit of a standoff now as to whether that's going to be enforced. In my lifetime and your lifetimes, it will be enforced because one way or the other, we're going to have a change in administrations, and there's bipartisan support for it. But I just tell this by way of example, just in terms of the things I've been working on. A lot of it is healthcare related. But these impacts, it's interesting, the things we were working on in the rural healthcare, one incentive for me as someone representing a non-rural areas, yeah, if we get things better in the rural areas, this is also going to help urban areas, like where we're sitting today in Henrico. So I mentioned telehealth. I had a father who was and needed all sorts of medical care towards the end of his life, was not in a position to get to a doctor every day. Just the mobility issues were too challenging. A lot of that was during the COVID time where we had even more flexibility on the telehealth. It was fantastic. He was doing daily visits with his doctors, sometimes over the phone, sometimes over a screen, over a tablet. But it made all the difference in the world. It was such a relief to the family not having to get him to the doctor every single day when he just needed the follow-up appointment. So that's an example. A lot of focus on telehealth in the rural areas, but it's absolutely helping all of us here, even those in the more urban areas. What we're doing, I mentioned the GLP-1 drugs, that's a benefit really for the whole state, not just for the rural areas. That's going to lift, I think, help a lot of people avoid the comorbidities, because a lot of folks who are obese develop diabetes. A lot of people with diabetes have heart disease. A lot of people with heart disease die. It's a pretty clear track. And so if we can get in front of the obesity, we can get in front of a lot of the other comorbidities that are out there. So that's the thinking. And the one thing I want to stress about that, and telling this long story about the rural health care, is that these were bipartisan efforts. We had unanimous agreement, as I mentioned, on these priorities. All of us, even rural areas, urban areas, et cetera, deal with health workforce issues. I chair something called the Virginia Health Workforce Development Authority, very focused on all levels of the medical professions, getting more people into those professions. Those shortages don't discriminate. They do disproportionately impact rural areas because it's tougher to get doctors to places like Farmville and Tazewell. But tell me, friends of mine trying to get an appointment with a mental health professional in Western Henrico, good luck. You're looking at about a 6-month wait to get into a doctor or even to a counselor in some cases. It's really challenging. And that's in Western Henrico. So imagine in more rural parts of the state. And I think that's the kind of impacted, I've had family members in Cedarfield. This is an amazing facility. But I know the leadership of Cedarfield. I know it's tough to keep the staffing levels that they have for the medical professionals and everyone who works here. It's a competitive environment out there, and this is hard work in some cases. And yeah, you're competing for limited resources. So we've made a concerted effort coming out of this committee, but also other work I do, trying to really improve the health workforce out there. Related to that, you're going to see an announcement in about another month and a half about creating something that's called the Virginia Nursing Workforce Center. Now, this is not to say we're completely starting over again with how we train and develop our nursing workforce. What we're doing is creating a position to coordinate the best practices, to coordinate the data that's used to understand how this whole nursing workforce is developed and managed in Virginia, and basically to do what we do better across the state. There are nursing shortages here, nursing shortages in Southwest, Eastern Shore, Northern Virginia, across Virginia, and we think we can do better. States that have put these centers in have done better. And so that's an example of something we're going to try to bring to the table, benefit you, benefit me, benefit all of us in that work. So those are the bills and the budget amendments I carry this year were mostly related to those initiatives. I have to tell this story because I did actually get our governor to sign one environmental protection-related bill, and I poke fun at that just because a lot of those bills did not do so well in the session. But I had a bill related to tree canopy protection. The idea for the bill came from a constituent who happens to be 8 years old, and he wrote me a really nice letter complete with a picture of a drawing of a tree saying, we need to do more to protect trees. This third grader's name is Liam. And so coincidentally, I was working with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation on some ideas for bills, and I wrote back to Liam and said, Liam, I think I've got a bill we can work on together. So Liam is his third grade self, showed up at 7 o'clock in the morning on a school day. He did have a blue blazer on. He was in uniform. Had to wait about an hour and a half to testify, but he got up when it was his turn. He was the last person to go. Read his letter, told his story about why tree canopy is important for helping to lower the temperature for all of us and making that easier to do in Virginia. He had instantly fans on the committee. He also had their other lobbyists representing environmental groups, but also the home builders, who are not always the friendliest group to tree canopy bills. He persuaded them as well to support this bill. So what was Liam's bill became Liam's law. Did the same thing in the Senate. The Senate can be tough sometimes, but they were pretty nice to Liam. But I had to tell Liam the reality, and that is that, Liam, you understand, you passed the House and the Senate, which are democratically controlled, but the governor still has to sign this bill. And I just told him straight up, so the governor's not signing a lot of environmental protection bills these days. But lo and behold, post-session, I got a call, and the governor signed the bill. And so the absolute highlight of my 2025 session was calling Liam's mom on her cell phone. Liam was next to her. She puts me on the speaker, and I said, Liam, the governor signed your bill. He starts yelling, starts screaming. I could literally hear him jumping up and down on the floor. He was so thrilled. And I just said to myself, if I could make all my constituents that happy, just even for a moment. So that was a highlight for me from this session. So more to talk about, and I'm sure a lot of your questions are going to be directed at the issue of the day, which is what's happening from Washington and the impacts. I do sit on House Appropriations and have a big healthcare focus there, healthcare focus everywhere, but it is an absolutely existential question as to what we're going to do in response to a lot of this. We've got a little bit of time, and most of the worst of the cuts in terms of Medicaid impacts, in terms of hospitals funding impacts, those are down the road a little bit, so things could change. What's not going to change is Virginia's balanced budget. That's constitutionally mandated, so we're not going to wake up and say, yeah, here's another $5 billion to deal with the federal deficit we now have, or the federal impact we now have. We can't do that. So there are going to be some hard choices, and I think Scott and I were talking earlier, this upcoming session already promised to be crazy. Now it's just going to be off the charts in terms of what we're dealing with. As one preview, there's still some question whether we may come into special session, which could happen as early as second week in September. Again, I don't know. Scholar, you may have more insight than I do on where we're going with that because, again, a lot of the impacts are still down the road a bit, but on the other hand, these are real. These changes are real, and we need to get in front of them. And they're just some really hard choices. And you're talking about there's medical impacts, food subsidy impacts. We're going to have to pick up about $250 million that we're not covering right now. A lot of concern about people getting kicked off of Medicaid. We've done, so much to get people on Medicaid and get insurance. And so the last thing we want to do is be taking steps backwards, but those kinds of pressures are there. So I'm going to hold further thoughts on that to your questions, but again, it's such a delight to be with you today, and again, I look forward to the questions.
Well, good afternoon, and Schuyler Van Valkenburg, and thank you for being here. This is a great crowd. And before I start, I just really want to be his hype man for this rural healthcare initiative because it's done a lot of great work. And, when I was first elected back in 2017, you might remember the news. Once a year, there would be national news about Southwestern Virginia with the Missions for Mercy initiative, where it would be a weekend of just dentists and doctors across the state going to Southwest Virginia and just yanking people's teeth, basically, in a lot of cases. And that was their health care. And because we passed Medicaid expansion, because we got dentistry included into Medicaid, those programs still exist, but they're much smaller because people have the care they need. And the work that Rodney did and led is the kind of next step of that, and it's really important work. And when you think about, Rodney's right, the benefits to everybody for having that. So let's just give him a round of applause for that, because he deserves that. I'll be his hype man if he won't. So I figured what I would do is I would just kind of give you some brief overviews on what I did, what we collectively did, where we had kumbaya, where we didn't have kumbaya, and then kind of where we're moving forward. This session, I carried a lot of bills that were in the housing and education space. And I'm not going to go into, if you have a question, I'll go into as much detail as you want. I could talk about housing for like 5 hours here, and all your eyes would all roll back in your head. But there's a lot, housing affordability is kind of all the rage these days, right? And it's very real. In our community, the average home sales price in Henrico was $216,000 5 years ago. Last year, it was $398,000. The percentage of homes that sold for under $400,000 went from 70% to 50%. And so I could keep going. Like, we have some real housing problems, and it's the whole Commonwealth. And so I've really kind of been banging that drum, and so I carried 4 bills that were in the supply space. There's a lot of different ways to talk about housing and to fix housing, and some of it's affordability, some of it's government subsidy, some of it's just building more. And I've been in the kind of building more space. How do we build more housing? The city of Austin, Texas, in 2023 permitted more new homes than the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. The entire Commonwealth. One city. So that kind of gets at the problem, I think, pretty succinctly. And so some of those bills had success, some didn't. It's a conversation. It's a tricky issue. I'm going to continue next session to really focus on housing too, because we're pricing out young folks. We're pricing out young families. We're making it so that older folks can't downsize. It really does impact everybody. In the education space, I had 3 bills that all passed and were signed by the governor that were about more and better time in the classroom. They all kind of got at it in different ways. One was a testing bill, one was about teacher training, one was about the instructional materials that teachers use in the classroom. But the goal in all cases was, how can we make sure that people are spending the most amount of time in the classroom learning, and how can we make sure that that time was maximized? That was the goal of all 3 bills. And then from there, I kind of had a bunch of different stuff. We need to build housing. We also need to build energy. We have major energy needs as a Commonwealth. And so I had a couple bills that tried to work on that. The governor did not look on them as favorably as he looked on Rodney's tree bill. And then other stuff, I focused a lot this past session on Henrico County specific needs. So if you saw me in the news, the thing you probably saw me in the news for was fighting a casino that is trying to be parachuted into our community. We got that through the legislature, and the governor vetoed it, so that casino is being built at Glenside and Staples Mill. But that was without our input. Most gaming in Virginia, you have to get the community's input before they have to say yes or no. There was a legal workaround that we thought was shady, but nonetheless is what's going on there. And then we worked on recovery home reform. So recovery homes are good things. This is where people go to get help when they have drug addiction. We have the 4th most recovery homes in the country as a locality. We are not the 4th biggest locality in the country. Okay, we have a lot of recovery homes. It's good, but they're very unregulated, and so there's some bad actors. And so Henrico County and myself, we really sat down and thought about how can we make sure that these homes are helping people, right? We don't want to drive them out. We just want to make sure they're being good actors. And so we passed a bill around that started the process, and will continue into next year. So that's kind of a focus of what I did: housing, education, some energy, and some Henrico County specific stuff. Kind of globally, the 2 biggest things I think we did as a legislature, one is the 3 constitutional amendments. So we passed 3 constitutional amendments: abortion access, getting rid of the gay marriage ban that's in the Constitution, and rights restoration, for when you come out of prison, having your rights automatically restored. We're the only state in the country that doesn't have that now. And so in Virginia, the General Assembly has to pass an amendment. There has to be an election. We have to pass it again, and then it goes to the voters. So we passed it for the first time, those 3 amendments, in January of this year. If the House remains Democratic, they'll pass again, and you will all vote on them in November of next year. If the House switches over to Republicans, you will not vote on any of them. That's just kind of brass tacks, the reality of it. 2 of those 3 amendments, gay marriage and rights restoration, had gone through the first step before, and then we lost the majority in 2021. So we passed those, and then the budget. So our budget, which is the second year of a 2-year budget, did a bunch of things. We had more revenue than we had thought we were going to have. And we basically did 3 big things. One is tax relief. So you'll be getting checks here soon in the mail for tax relief. That was one part of it. The second thing we did is we had to invest $1 billion into Medicaid to make sure our program was whole. And then the third thing was we got rid of the support staff cap in education. It's a big fancy thing, but essentially back when we had the Great Recession, the state limited how much money it gave localities for like bus drivers, psychologists, your support staff. And localities, a lot of them couldn't afford to make that up. And so we got rid of that cap, which is a really good thing for schools. And so those were the 3 big things we did. We also put a lot of money into the rainy day fund because it's raining. And so we need to be prepared. The rain is coming. Moving forward, this is where I'll kind of end. For the most part, the Virginia legislature is actually really bipartisan, and we do get core things done. We get a budget done, and the majority of people vote for it. We have a transportation issue, we tackle it, we get to work. Rural health care, we agree it's a problem, we figure it out. And so for the most part, it is a pretty bipartisan legislature, which is good. There's some areas we're not. So we had big fights over energy. There's really big fights over energy in this Commonwealth, and that's the place that I think we all really need to be worried about, because we need energy, and people don't want to build it. And that's what the fights were over, what to build, where to build it. And we have increasing energy needs because we're building a lot of data centers in Virginia. Data centers are necessary. Your phone functions because of data centers. But we have to have real conversations around that, and that got pretty nasty this year. We fought over guns. Should they be regulated? Should they not? We fought over contraception and contraception access. And then we fought over kind of what do we need to do to think about what's happening in DC. And so we had some fights about that. Moving forward, then this is where I'll end, kind of things to look for. Both chambers did create special committees to watch over what's happening in DC that are meeting semi-regularly. So the House committee is going around the state. So for instance, they were in Hampton Roads, I think a week ago, getting testimony on how Hampton Roads is being impacted by what's happening in DC. They did one in Richmond. They had one in Northern Virginia. The Senate one is kind of staying local and is a little bit more in Richmond focused, but they're still kind of staying on top of that, seeing what our needs are. Second kind of thing to look forward, moving forward, is colleges. You may have seen that Donald Trump forced out the UVA president. And we could sit here and talk about that for a long time too. I think the really, really, really unfortunate thing about that is it really nationalized our college process, our picking of college board members. So our schools are all run independently here. Some states centralize it, like the New York Regents or North Carolina, where you have one board that's in charge of all the schools. Here, each school is run by an individual board. The governor picks the board members, and the Senate and House approve them. And that hasn't traditionally been very partisan. So, like, for example, Terry McAuliffe picked Republicans to be on board members, It hasn't traditionally been very partisan. It's gotten more partisan in the last 4 years, but Donald Trump interjecting himself into Virginia higher ed politics really supercharged that. And so that's having a huge impact on the nominees that Glenn Youngkin picked. We rejected 8 nominees a couple weeks ago from VMI, George Mason, and UVA, which are the 3 schools that are being targeted by Donald Trump and by Glenn Youngkin. And we have to have a conversation because he just appointed 58 more members, and there's conversation around that. We also have to have a conversation around how to reform the process for picking these board members, because the system wasn't based on a partisan system. And so there's a lot of things that need to be cleaned up if moving forward, this is going to be a partisan conversation, to try to make it less partisan, for the record. That's the cleanup. So that's going to be a big topic next session. And then I think I'll end by just saying building things are going to continue to be a big conversation. Building housing, building energy, building data centers. What should we build? Where should we build it? When should we build it? I think is going to be a huge conversation because these are needs. You have to have housing if you want to have a good economy. If you want a place for workers and families to live. You got to have energy in your house. So I think those are going to continue to be big topics moving forward as well, outside of all the federal stuff, because the last thing, of course, is what do we do about our budget? And it's not clear in the moment because it's not clear what the impact is going to be. And so I'm not sure I have a better answer because I don't think anybody has a good answer. We are seeing softening in the Virginia economy. Unemployment is going up. Our tax returns are starting to go down. So we are starting to see the negative impacts. I think it's something like over 10,000 federal employees are officially unemployed. But that number's low because remember, a lot of people who were fired got a package, so they're not technically unemployed until like September, October. So there's many more who will be officially hitting that unemployment number soon. And so we're kind of in wait and see. But on that gloomy note, I guess I'll stop. I know we can take questions.
Thank you very much. I think we have a lot to think about and a lot of questions to ask. I'm going to ask 2 questions, maybe 1.5. The first one is, Senator, I've always been curious about this. How old were you when you learned how to spell your name?
Kids are pretty resilient. I learned young.
And the second question I have, Delegate Willett, would you like to elaborate a little bit more on what's happening with the constitutional amendment process? And then the 2 people who are going to,
Oh, they're working on that.
I don't have anything to do.
No, so we're talking about the 3 amendments that we have before us. I think Scholar explained the process well. One thing maybe I will emphasize, besides the time frame, is just the fact why. Why do you have constitutional amendments? And it really is the ultimate protection, because of that process, the legislature can't just show up the next year and say, you know what, actually we didn't mean to do that, and then undo a constitutional amendment. It's a multi-year, multi-step process for a reason. You're changing the Constitution. So it's a high bar, it's a high standard, it's a lengthy process. But there are things that, like reproductive health care, like voting rights, like gay marriage, that deserve that protection because, particularly in the times in which we live, a lot of things just aren't as protected as they were. Once upon a time, not that long ago, you could say reproductive health care, abortion rights were constitutionally protected through court precedent. That's no longer true. It's up to the states, and that burden now falls on us, and we think we need to put that in the Constitution. As we stand here today, the Virginia Constitution actually says that gay marriage is not legal. That has been overturned by court precedent, but if you look at the Constitution, those are the words that are in there. So I think that's also very ripe to change. And then as Schuyler mentioned, we're the only state standing, last one standing, that doesn't have automatic restoration of felon voting rights. The only state. That is not a distinction you want. So I think that speaks to it, how important these amendments are. And I do think you're going to get a chance to vote on those in the near future.
I have the opportunity to ask the first question. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, we are very proud of our electoral boards at the state level and at each of our counties and cities. There's been a movement toward ranked voting. Would you please explain that to us, and what is its status now in our state?
Yeah. So ranked choice voting is just a different model of voting, right? Where you essentially, let's say 6 people are running for office under our current system, right? You would just vote for one. And, if you got the person you picked won and they won with 20% of the vote, they're the winner, right? 20% is is all you need. It's first past the post elections. Ranked choice voting, there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but essentially a person doesn't win until they get to 50.1%. So you rank the 6 people, or up to, you don't have to rank them all, but you ranked up to 6, or whatever the number is by state law, and then whoever's in last place, then they're off the ticket, right? And then the second place, whoever those voters put in second place, gets that person's votes. And so what happens is you could end up going, right? So then let's say the person goes up to 30%, right? That's not 50.1. So then the next lowest person comes off. I'm not explaining this very well, but essentially it's a way to make sure that whoever wins has broad-based support. Okay, so oftentimes you see ranked choice voting in primaries, right? Like, so the Alaska primary is a pretty good example of it. New York's mayor's race does a ranked choice voting. And the idea is that you don't want somebody who only has 20% support to be your nominee. You want someone who has broad-based support. It changes how people campaign because you have to get to 50.1, and if you alienate other people's supporters, you are less likely to be their second choice. And so in a ranked choice voting system, you see a lot of candidates campaigning together, actually. So it kind of changes the tenor of the conversation. I would tell you that it doesn't change the world. It doesn't actually do all that much. What it does is it makes it much harder for people who are not popular but have a decent base. It stops them from winning. So like Sarah Palin in Alaska is the example. Sarah Palin's a Republican. Alaska is default Republican. And in ranked choice voting, there were enough Republicans that were like, we just don't like her. And so they ranked a Democrat before her. And so the Democrat won. And so ranked choice voting kind of boxes out people who are not popular beyond like a shallow base of support. If any of you have ever been to New York or lived in New York has a different version of it's not ranked choice voting, they have fusion voting, where you can be on the ticket multiple times. So like I can run as a Democrat and on the Workers' Party and on the Green Party, so you can see my name 3 times. So if you're a Green Party person and you're like, I hate Democrats, but the Green Party says this guy's cool, right? You can get vote, right? You can do it that way. So it's ranked choice voting is just like another way of voting to try to bring in more voices. It sounds confusing. It's not actually confusing. I did an awful job of explaining it. Everybody go watch a video on YouTube and you'll be like, this makes total sense. We have it locally. So localities can choose to do ranked choice voting right now under law. So if Henrico County has not chosen to do that, but if the Board of Supervisors voted to do ranked choice voting for local elections, they could do that. Charlottesville does it, Alexandria does it, that might be it. And so they can choose to do it in local elections. That's all we have right now. State and federal elections cannot be ranked choice voting. I think it's kind of cool because it gives people more choice and it changes the tenor of the election. It's also not a hill I'm going to die on.
Hi, y'all. Kay Schlembach here. I have a quick question for you. You addressed the rural health issues really well, so I'm not going to include that. Can you hear me better now? Yes. Thank you. Would you please explain the Medicaid trigger law in the state of Virginia and how that may impact, not necessarily this year, but planning for the following year?
Yeah, and maybe we get there, maybe we don't. So basically, when Virginia expanded Medicaid, and not all states did this, just a handful did this, they had what's called a trigger law, and if you lose a certain percentage of coverage or contribution from the federal government, then the expansion is reversed and stopped. And so in the House version of the bill, that was absolutely a threat, that we were going to trigger the trigger law and then have essentially a rollback of the expansion in Virginia. That's not the version we have in front of us, but there still are significant potential impacts to Medicaid, and that's when you talk about, for example, the work requirement and the enrollment or re-enrollment requirements for that. And again, I'm all supportive of able-bodied people working, but you have to understand how it is not an easy path to get on Medicaid. It should be easier, it's not. There are navigators out there who do nothing but help people get signed up for Medicaid, and it's still hard to get people signed up. So throwing another set of hurdles at them, that's where the numbers come from in terms of the losses for Medicaid enrollment, the people not getting on there. The other part of it, too, is the state, there's no state that is set up right now to implement this. So we call it DMAS in Virginia. Our Medicaid agency has to put a system in place to enable folks to be able to prove the work, that they're meeting the work requirements. So hurdles upon hurdles mean folks will not have access. That's the bottom line. So when you talk about people losing Medicaid, that's really what they're. And then the part two that's related to Medicaid is what's called the provider tax. So I hate some of the characterizations in the news because they'll talk about this scheme that the state of it's actually New Hampshire first thought of this 4 decades ago as to how to leverage Medicaid dollars more to the state advantage. But what started out as one state figuring out a way to get more Medicaid money is now a system. 49 states leverage the fact that the federal government will match dollars, additional expenditures through the hospitals, and it essentially becomes the hospitals are paying for Medicaid expansion in Virginia. They're paying fees for that. The way they're made whole is through these increased reimbursement rates through the federal government. So what's in the bill, the big bill, is a change to that formula. And there's absolute bipartisan agreement on this. It will devastate the hospitals, and not just the rural hospitals. The rural hospitals are the ones hanging on by a thread. So in Virginia, they're they're projected to be 6 hospitals, mostly in the western part of the state, that'll close. Even Bon Secours, St. Mary's, even HCA over on Forest and Skipwith, which those are both hospitals in my district. Those are wonderful hospitals. They're both part of one's a nonprofit, one's a for-profit, both excellent hospital systems. They are scared to death of this change because even though they have other means, they do have paying regular private insurance customers, they have a significant Medicaid population. And you start messing with that formula, they lose beds, they lose doctors, they lose patients, we all lose services. So it's a threat across the state. The Hospital Association, which is a bipartisan group actually led by a former Republican elected official, wrote a letter that I then echoed expressing that exact concern. So this is not partisan politics. This is the reality of our healthcare system, that you are messing with a system that impacts all of us. Yes.
Virginia has been a right-to-work state since 1947. In 2016, there was an amendment proposed, an attempt to enshrine that in the state constitution, which failed. This is going to be a highly contentious issue in the upcoming election. I just wanted to know your thoughts and your position on this, please.
Yeah, so, the governor, the gubernatorial candidate, Abigail Spanberger, came out and said she doesn't want to get rid of it. And so I think that's kind of assuming, if she wins or if she loses, it's kind of off the table as an issue over the next 4 years. I mean, I personally believe there's a lot of ways you can help workers without impacting that can do a lot of good. I tend to think that the issue on both sides gets pretty inflated in the sense of there's a lot of unions that'll tell you there's these other policies that will do much more for workers. and then businesses go out of their way to scare everybody to death that, like, if you get rid of right to work, it's going to be the end of the world. When the state that was the best for business the year before we were was Washington, which has one of the most robust union systems in the country and is not a right to work state. And so, you know, to my mind, it's like, let's focus on the things we can get done and let's prioritize those under, hopefully, I hope, a Spanberger governorship. So that's things like prevailing wages, project labor. I think project labor agreements are probably the number one thing we can do for workers in this state. You know, those are contracts for big projects where they negotiate essentially apprentices that are local as opposed to bringing in workers from out of state for these projects. And so, you know, I think my position on it is it's not the end of the world either way. It's off the table. Let's focus on the things we can get done. Let's focus on, you know, I think our economy needs to be better for working people. I think that the evidence is pretty clear on that. And so let's raise the minimum wage. Let's get a more robust project labor agreement system. Let's have prevailing wage where we can have it. And I think we need to have a conversation about right to work, because I think that you notice that a lot of the states that don't have right to work tend to be more economically affluent than we are. And so what that conversation looks like, I honestly don't know, because it's not clear what is politically possible.
I have a question.
I was going to echo just real quickly what Skylar said. I absolutely agree with that. Virginia, we just lost our top ranking, but I think we can once again be the best place for business and the best place for workers. And we tend to get really high rankings on the business side, not as much on the worker side. It's all the things he said. It's family medical leave. It's more training dollars. It's more child care access for workers. And that's a big issue. I know Abigail Spanberger just came out with a statement on that. I think it's actually bipartisan support. I think Winsome Sears would also support that, trying to do more for child care. So I think we take care of the workers and those issues. I think we'll get to a better place for all of us.
How will Virginia deal with all the cuts to public education?
Start with the good news. The good news is that the majority bulk of the funding is state and local. So you know, assuming our budget can hold out, and we don't have to just cut, the state and local does do the bulk of it. The bad news is a lot of the federal funding that's directly in education goes to the people who need it the most, right? So this is like after-school programming. This is research that figures out kind of how to implement best practices in schools. The most famous part of that, or the most kind of well-known part of that, are like the NAEP tests, right? Where you take these NAEP tests to see how kids are performing. That's all through federal research grants that are being cut. You know, this is like, there's the VCU has a program that is about mentoring teachers in kind of hard to staff schools, and then kind of helping them through the early parts of their career. That's the stuff that's being cut, which is a tragedy, because that's actually the role we need the federal government to play. The other place that gets cut is civil rights, which is essentially special education. It's a majority of that is special education enforcement. So when a state or a locality is not doing what it's supposed to be doing on special education, it's federal adjudicators through the DOE that come and investigate and hold those states and localities to account. And that's being cut, right? So, and Pell Grants. So it's the kind of tragedy is that the federal spending on education actually is effective and goes where it's supposed to go and where we need it to go and where it's helpful for it to go. We're not going to be able to replace it. We're not. Like, it's just, and hopefully 24 states are suing right now. 24, not Virginia, but 24 states are suing over these cuts, saying they're illegal. I don't know what the chances of them winning are. My bigger concern is that the economy tanks in Virginia because of tariffs and because of these federal cuts, and then we're in a position where the state and local monies have to be cut. And that's the kind of core monies that go to the localities. I ran for office in 2017 largely because I did not like how Virginia responded to the Great Recession in 2008-9. I mean, they essentially just cut education to nothing and then left it kind of lying on the hospital ground for 10 years. And I just thought the initial response was poor, and I thought the neglect over the next decade was even worse. And that's why I ran. So I am certainly not going to be advocating or voting for any policy that does the same in 2026, which is when we'd vote on it. Because what are we even doing here for cutting the thing that if you go to the best state for business rankings, the reason we're the best state for business is because of our #1 ranking in education. And so, we're going to have a legislature and a governor that actually is willing to make some hard choices. And some of those hard choices will be around how do we not cut education. Yeah.
Better? As I said, I'm a come here. Despite the fact I moved here in 1970, I'm a come here. You've referred several times to the budget process.
Yeah.
Virginia is the only place I have ever seen where you legislate through the budget. How in the hell does that work?
Criticism taken. That is it is true, and we have I guess since time beginning of time for our state process, and we do legislate through the budget to a balanced budget. But I think what you're referring to is that there are absolutely effectively laws that are passed through the budget. I do, even though I've probably taken advantage of that process, I do take exception to it. If things are still in the sunshine, that may pass muster. But a lot of the budget work is done. Even though I sit on appropriations, end of the day, there's a conference committee between the House and the Senate that work out the final details, and even that larger group really comes down to just a couple of people sort of figuring it out. And there's a lot that's legislated through that compromise that has the effect of law. So no, it's a legitimate criticism, and how you fix that, I guess that's probably a constitutional change, because it's certainly the process we have right now. But it is unfortunately part of our government. There are good things that come from that. Yes, when you're pressed, we have such a short period of time. I mean, 45-day sessions, 60-day sessions. It's so compressed, and a lot of times you can really make some great things happen through the budget to help people. That there's a problem in a certain area, certain part of the code, whatever, and you can get it fixed much faster that way. But I do agree, when you're potentially leaving the public out of the process, that's certainly not right.
The only thing I'd add to that is that federal bill had a lot of legislating in the budget too.
You mentioned the UVA president retiring. With all the chaos that's going on around DEI, what can the General Assembly do to help in this whole chaotic situation? And then secondly, have you two gentlemen participated in any of the protest marches?
Yes to the second question. And to the college question, in the short term, the thing we can do is hold the governor to account with the appointments he picks. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of the things that are coming down from the feds, there's just only but so much we can do. And so with the federal government's kind of in the Trump administration's kind of insistence on focusing on DEI in colleges, there's only so many levers we can pull. There just is. I think the main lever we can pull in this moment is making sure that the people he picks to those boards of visitors that ultimately make the decisions are people who are responsible and people who will govern for Virginia. I think the biggest thing that we have seen over the last 2 years with these higher ed institutions is some institutions, he's picked people who are great and the boards are working well. William and Mary Washington, Virginia Tech, everything seems to be going mostly okay. But there have been certain schools where there's been a lot of conflict. George Mason and VMI are the two that have probably been most prominent in the news on this conflict over DEI. And that's one reason why we shot down 6 of his appointments to the board 2 weeks ago, because the people that he picked were, quite frankly, out of the mainstream. If you look at UVA, UVA is actually a pretty interesting example, because at UVA, the governor has been provocative, and he has picked some provocative people, including one that he then fired because the guy was giving him such a hard time. But interestingly enough, despite the fact that he had, I think at the time, 12 out of 14 board appointments were his, that board refused to fire Jim Ryan. And that board really allowed Jim Ryan to do his work. Now, and I think that what that tells you is that those board members went there and they saw, oh, Jim Ryan's doing an okay job. And Jim Ryan is managing this college well. There's no reason to fire Jim Ryan. The VMI board did fire their president about a month ago, and it was real ugly. But at UVA, they didn't do that. And that's when the Trump administration came in. Unfortunately, the UVA board was then silent and didn't have President Ryan's back, which was a huge problem. And I think is one of the reasons why you're going to see a lot of legislation that's going to come out of the General Assembly in January around reforming how these boards work. Because those boards are supposed to have the university's back. They're not supposed to have the back of a president. They're not supposed to have the back of a governor. They're supposed to have the back of the college that they were chosen to run. So I don't know that I've answered your question well. The laws on the books in Virginia when it comes to the idea of equality and diversity are good. The laws are not the problem. The problem is who's being picked. And so we've started being more aggressive, not allowing some of these people to serve on the boards, partially because the governor's picks have gotten more right-wing, like Ken Cuccinelli at UVA. But we're going to have a real conversation around reforming those boards and making clear that their mission is to the college. And I don't know that I advocate Abigail Spanberger doing this, so what I'm about to say, take with a grain of salt, I think. But Glenn Youngkin fired Bert Ellis from the UVA board for neglect of his duties, and I think you can make a case that every single board member on that board neglected their duties when they didn't stand up for Jim Ryan. I really do. And so, those are grounds for dismissal. I'm not advocating she do that necessarily, but cleaning up the process is the most immediate step we can make outside of not allowing some of these more radical members to join.
Yeah,
How about one more question from that side or the middle? Marta, did you have your hand up? All right, I'm coming to you.
Would you please state your position on any proposed legislation prohibiting transgender biological males from participating in women's sports? Would you favor legislation banning that?
I don't think we need that, just to jump to that question or that response, I don't think we need that legislation in Virginia. We actually had until the Trump administration made them undo it. Our Virginia High School League and the public schools had this issue completely under control. First of all, is a subset of a subset of a subset of students who are affected by this in terms of being biological males participating in sports. They had standards, they were health-based standards, they were medical-based standards. It affected literally, I think, a dozen kids over two kids of all the tens of thousands of kids, hundreds of thousands of kids in Virginia's public school sports, 2 kids affected by it. So first of all, it is not a widespread issue. But second of all, we had a system for dealing with it. There were distinctions made based on hormone levels or testosterone levels. It worked. And unfortunately, the Virginia High School League was under tremendous pressure from the Trump administration to back down from that, and they did. And so now we're beholden to whatever rules come from Washington, I guess, in dealing with that. And it's really unfortunate. There are distinctions that can be made there, and again, in a scientific and a medical way. I think way too much attention is given to this issue because it's such a small group of people. There's a much greater issue because there is a much greater trans student population. And I could go on for days about how those students are not taken care of in our schools right now. And not all, but in some schools, that they're not respected the way they should be. That's a separate set of issues affecting a much broader group of people. But the athletes' focus, I think, is way, all the media attention on it way overblown because it's such a small group of kids. And again, we had an answer, and unfortunately, it's being ignored now.
Yeah, I'll just add that the VHSL was actually rejecting kids, right? So they had a process where if it wasn't fair for my daughter, right, then my daughter wouldn't compete against that kid, while also balancing the parents and families of transgender kids who want their kid to have a normal education, right, and where it was appropriate, they could compete. So that VHSL did have a set of laws that made the right distinctions, that tried to make sure that everybody had a fair playing field, that it was equal, and that everybody's concerns were addressed. That's the only thing I'll add.
I have one question for you. Recently, Virginia, which used to be ranked as the top state in the U.S. for doing business, suddenly now dropped to number 4. Can you explain the criteria, the rationale for that?
Yeah, so CNBC basically just objectively said that Virginia dropped from 1 to